Okay, trimming. So trimming, turn my wheel on. Trimming happens when the piece is somewhat dry. It is not leather hard. It's also not as soft as it was when we were throwing it. So if you were doing it in the same day, if you were trimming a piece in the same day, you would probably have to wait about 4 or 5 hours, it seems like, in this environment, because it does stay pretty wet for a little while. Normally what we do is bag the piece, and the next week when you come in for class, it would be ready for you to trim. You would come in to class, take the bag off of the piece and let your piece sit out in the air for just a little bit, because even one bag is keeping it a little bit wetter than it needs to be. If you were coming back for an open studio, you would do the same thing. You would bag it with one bag, come into the beginning of open studio and take the bag off, and then judge when you could go ahead and do your trimming. You have to make sure that the rim of your piece is strong enough to hold up to this, to supporting the bowl, the pot, whatever side, whatever bowl you or cup or whatever you have. So right now my piece has been sitting out for about 5 days in a bag. It's nice and soft. You can see that I can kind of push and change the bottom a little bit. So that's pretty good. If it's too soft, you're gonna gouge it. And if it's too hard, you're gonna just kind of be shaving it into little slivers of clay, which is fine also, but a lot of times it ends up kind of angling more than you would want to. You don't get a smooth, rounded bottom. So you have to kind of have the right time to do the trimming. So again, rim has to be steady. It has to be sturdy enough to support the pot when you put it down on the piece. We're gonna go ahead and center this piece by hand. It's called tap centering. So what I do is I put my finger right kind of in front of the pot. So directly in front of my belly and in front of the rim, or the base of the pot. And I spin and just keep an eye on that. And when I see it coming too close to my finger, I have to adjust it, and I'm just kind of the idea of tap centering came because you're actually tapping it into place, and I can tell if there's an area where I need to tap it away from my finger a little bit. For example, over here, it's getting a little bit close. So I'm gonna sit here with my finger steady. As you can see, my finger is supported by my other hand. My dominant hand is supported by my non-dominant hand, and gonna give me a nice kind of steady support while I am going slowly. You can hear the wheel crying, making those noises. That's how slow I'm going. And again, I wanna make sure that I am pretty even as far as distance away from my finger. You can get a little dizzy staring at this. So it's pretty good. Okay, once I have that centered in the middle of the bat, I'm gonna take my clay. I'm using the same kind of clay that I threw with, and I'm taking a nice little chunk of it, and I'm gonna break that chunk into 3 smaller chunks. And these chunks are gonna hold my piece to the bat in place. So what I'm gonna do is hold my piece down in the center. The wheel is not turning at this point, it's stopped. I'm gonna push this down onto the bat and kind of leaning up into the piece. I don't want to smush it all the way into the piece, and if your walls are thin or too wet, then it's going to kind of warp the side of the wall of your piece. So you want to make sure that your walls, again, your rim and your walls are steady. And then I'm going to push that piece down. I'm going to do that in 3 different places on my wheel. Normally I wouldn't turn it until I had it all supported, but I want you to be able to see where I am pushing those down. So, and then again, a third spot. And these are going to hold my cup in place because we're going to be moving this a little bit. We're going to really be kind of aggravating it a little bit whenever we're trimming. The large loop tool that you have, this large loop tool, this is really a trimming tool. It's a great tool for cleaning out your pieces as well, but we use this as a trimming tool. And what I'm going to try to do is actually make this edge nice and smooth. I want to trim off any extra clay that shouldn't be there because it's so thick. Remember when we center, originally when we centered to throw, we don't worry about the clay that is touching the bat. So trimming does two things. It gets rid of the thickness that was around the base of the cup that didn't get centered, and it can also flatten your bottom if you when you took it off, when you wired it off, it kind of got a little messed up and it maybe wasn't sitting flat on the table, anything like that. Now it can do a lot of fancy things too. You can put a foot ring in, you can do all kinds of different bottoms that both have a well in the bottom and a ring that sits up around the edge, and that's called a foot ring. You just have to decide what kind of foot you want on your pieces. A lot of times when I'm doing utilitarian wear like pots and mugs and things like that, I do not put a foot ring in my piece because when it goes through the dishwasher, that water at the end of the rinse cycle just kind of wells up in that little dip inside the foot ring, and I'm not crazy about that. So I do like a flat bottom cup or mug or bowl, things like that. But sometimes I do put a foot ring in. A lot of my vases, or most all of my vases, I put a foot ring in. I'm going to go ahead and show you a foot ring on this as well. So I'm going to trim with this loop tool, and the first thing I'm going to do is to come off the edge at an angle. And if you notice how my non-dominant hand is still kind of steady on the top of my piece, and the bottom, or I'm sorry, the side of my loop tool is trimming. Now you could, if you needed to, balance your arm that is holding your piece. You can balance that on your leg like you did before when you were throwing. You definitely need to balance this arm. If you can see, my trimming arm is balanced. So I go very slowly. This is very methodical. Actually, a lot of people love trimming because of how methodical it is. And I'm just gonna kind of take off that extra bit. If you notice, I'm not adding any water. So my tool is dry as well, and that is why you've got to catch your piece at the right moisture level so that it is able to trim off. It's not kind of shivering with little splinters of clay that are coming off, but that your tool can glide through it. And I don't go very far. So really you should only be approaching the area that you couldn't center when you threw. So that means that down the wall, all of that would have been taken care of when you were throwing. So in the process. So you don't really want to go too far down because theoretically the walls of your piece should be at the thickness, the desired thickness, because of how you threw. So right in this area, right in between the base of your piece and about ½ inch up off of that base, that's kind of where your thickness lies, and that's where you want to do your trimming. Okay, so if I wanted to take off some of my base is really flat right now. If it wasn't, then I'm going to just kind of start at the center and just pull that loop tool over to the side a little bit. As you can see, it's going over to the side. It's kind of a natural spin. You get a little spiral in there. You can also, as you can see, I'm holding my loop tool now to steady it with my non-dominant hand. So I'm pulling through with my dominant hand and I'm holding it steady with my non-dominant hand. Again, you want to make sure that your piece is nice and secure with those little nuggets of clay. and I'm going slow, not so slow as it's crying like it was when I was tap centering, but it's pretty slow. So so that's a nice flat bottom, and I can kind of clean up these edges a bit with this tool. If I wanted to put in a foot ring, the first thing I need to do is kind of listen to how thick my piece is. So when I tap it, I can tell if this is weak. Let me stop it. I don't think you can hear it though. So I can tell if it's weak or if I have some thickness there that I can play around with. I usually leave a little bit more than a ½ inch, around a ½ inch to a little bit more of it in the bottom of my base if I'm going to do a foot ring. If I'm not going to do a foot ring, then I go down to a little bit below a ½ inch. So there should be enough here for me to show you about doing a foot ring. I'm going to take the narrow side and I'm just going to kind of gouge in just a little bit or create like a little divot in the base of my piece, and I'm holding my tool steady while my wheel spins. So that gives me a little kind of channel there that I want to aim to clear out in the center. So I'm gonna go ahead and clean out the inside. So I'm only really trimming to that edge that I just cleared out with that little thin area. So I'm gonna keep spinning until I clean out that whole edge. Remember, I don't need to turn my tool because my wheel is turning. So I don't need to do too much with my hand. I just need to smooth it all. And I'm just taking out that extra clay that was kind of in the center heart. Yes, you can hear my wheel crying a little bit. I'm going pretty slow so I can see it. Let me go a little faster. If you can go a little faster, you get a little bit more of an even trim. But if you go super fast, you're going to cut right into it and cut a hole in the bottom of your piece. Okay, so I'm just taking my trimming over to that divot that I made, or that channel that I made with the thin tool, which leaves me with a slight foot ring around the outside of my piece. And I can actually make that foot ring thicker if I want to, just by going in deeper on that edge. So it's all about balancing your tool and balancing your piece at this point. Just going to take off some more. You want, if you're going to take off more, you really want to tap it and make sure you're not getting too thin. It's very easy to get carried away with trimming and go through your bottom. So you want to make sure that you don't go through that bottom. Now, some people hand trim their pieces, so you can actually just use your banding wheel at your hand building station if you feel more comfortable doing that. I think trimming on the wheel is very satisfying, and it gives you a nice flat area for your piece to sit on the table nicely. But some people do like that control that a hand situation would do. So I'm going to get that little knobby off that bottom. So I want you to notice how my dominant arm is resting on my thigh. It's being supported completely by it, and it's very steady. My dominant hand is holding fairly tight to the tool. I want to make sure that there's nothing on the pottery piece that's going to grab at the tool and make me lose grip. And then my non-dominant arm is also balanced on my thigh, and my non-dominant hand keeps a steady balance on the piece while it is turning. All of those parts are in place to keep everything running very smoothly. It's turning with speed. So if there's ever anything that is sharp or going to catch on my tool, my arms and my hands are steady, and I can go ahead and make sure that tool's not cutting where it doesn't need to be. The other thing is the rest of my body is very still. It's very steady. Just like in throwing, I'm not having a lot of movement with my body so that I don't have to readjust or affirm my position every time I come back to the piece. I'm holding steady the whole time. Okay, if I wanted that ring on this outside to be more pronounced, the foot ring that I have in there, if I want it to be more pronounced, I can take my tool on the outside of the piece very slowly and holding it steady, and basically carve in a little ring around the outside edge of my pot. And that is going to give me a very nice little emphasis on the ring. So if you can see that after I did my trimming with my tool, I went back with my fingers to just kind of smooth that along. And then I'm just going to get that edging on the side of my cup a little bit smooth as well. And when I am feeling like it is done, which I am just about to feel there, I'm just again smoothing with my finger a little bit. I like to go over with my finger. Okay, so before I take it off of my bat here, I take my dead pen and I write my name on the bottom. If you have a stamp with your name, you can actually use the stamp too, but you want to make sure, because this is so soft right now, it's very fresh clay that I have unveiled by the trimming, you have to make sure that you're putting something inside the piece when you stamp on the bottom so that you have a counter pressure to your stamp. And I just usually take one of these long throwing sticks and kind of put it on the bottom, and then my stamp is in the opposite side of the clay in the same position though. Okay, so once you are done trimming, go ahead and take this off, and you can see how nice that piece is. The rim doesn't get addressed at this point. It should have been addressed when you were throwing, but every once in a while I will just take my finger and just finger sand around that rim again, just in case it picks up any clay from the bat that I was using or anything like that. I have a little bump right there, so I'm just kind of finger sanding this down and pressing down with it. But other than that, I have a really pretty tumbler, and if I wanted to at this point is when I put the handle on. So you want your moisture levels with handles to be about the same level of hydration, and so we're going to talk about handles in another video.